Welcome back to the Kokiri Kingdom! You may have noticed that today's video is actually pretty different from the previous two videos that I've posted, and that's because today's is a super special presentation. It's actually an adaptation of an article that I wrote for RaiderKing.com, which is a website where I do a lot of reviews and guides and general gaming pieces, called Twilight Princess's Slow Opening is Actually Perfect. So sit back, relax, and get ready to hear my long analysis of why you should absolutely love Twilight Princess's intro. So, ever since the series' inception, the Legend of Zelda franchise has become known online for its quick jump from introduction straight into the action, which almost immediately sends the player out into the world with minimal tutorials and the trust that they'll learn how to play along the way. This honestly is found in every era of the series, from the original NES Classic allowing the player to go in any direction they want after acquiring their first wooden sword, to the most recent entries like Breath of the Wild, telling Link that he can explore the land of Hyrule however he wishes. Even in Ocarina of Time, a game which revolutionized 3D gaming and therefore needed to have an extended tutorial, they didn't really hold the player back for more than a few minutes and simply guided them along in the right direction. And with intros like these, The Legend of Zelda became absolutely synonymous with pick-up-and-play game design. However, where there's a rule, there's an exception, and this rule is absolutely no different. In both the main Wii titles for the franchise, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess and The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, there's a very lengthy, story-heavy tutorial where the player would spend some time playing through the typical day in the life of Link, spending potentially hours simply existing amongst the game's cast before they could even obtain a sword, much less set foot inside a dungeon. And while the introduction sequences of both of these titles were panned pretty heavily by fans back in the forum-heavy age of the internet, time has honestly proven pretty kind to both of them. Twilight Princess in particular has aged like a fine wine, and its opening is pretty much a master class demonstration in how to immediately establish a world of characters while also subtly teaching the player everything they need to know about the game in a way that flows naturally and is unobtrusive. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess doesn't begin with Link getting a message from Princess Zelda in a dream, or even with him setting off on his adventure. In fact, the game doesn't even begin in Hyrule, where nearly every other game in the series is set. Instead, you're thrown into the role of a farm boy named Link living in a small place called Ordon Village, which is sort of neighbors to Hyrule, but much less impressive. He is told that in 2 days, he will have to go to Hyrule to deliver a letter for his mentor. But you may have noticed, that's in 2 days. That's not till later. For now, you need to start herding some goats in their pen. The very first tutorial of this game is actually about using your horse Epona, dashing with her and guiding her to jump over fences so you can perform your farm duties. This alone constitutes a massive shift in how The Legend of Zelda is designed at this point. Typically, the player doesn't even have access to a horse until nearly the halfway point of the game. Admittedly, it's actually kind of the same here. Despite the horse tutorial being the first thing the player will do in the game, you won't actually have full access to Epona until at least a dozen hours after this moment, which is admittedly a little strange. But putting aside the oddness of giving a tutorial for a mechanic hours before you can actually use it, this moment is actually a perfect encapsulation of what the opening hours of Twilight Princess will entail. There is no threat yet. There's no adventure to go on, and there's simply no monsters to defend the land against. Much like Luke Skywalker once was, you're just a simple farm boy doing your job, and unlike Luke, you're actually enjoying your life. This Link, had he not gotten the call to adventure, could have probably lived a pretty happy life as a farmer, but this isn't a farming sim, and you know that. Once Link's work is done, however, it's still a normal life. It's time to head to sleep and get ready for the next day. And as the player begins to walk home as Link, they may take note of Link's character model, or at least they would if I wasn't using the Linkle mod. I'm just gonna have to turn that off for a sec. Give me a moment. But, there we go. There's normal Link. Normal male Link. there he is. So at any rate, once we're actually Link, you can take a look at his character model and see that his clothes aren't those of the legendary hero yet. In fact, he's wearing discolored rags. Most of his outfit looks like multiple pieces of cloth simply thrown together instead of even a full tunic. There's even, if you look closely, a rip on his sleeve which helps emphasize one important fact. Link isn't very well off. Now, it's not that Link is ever usually rich. I mean, usually he's just the child of some relatively average family, or a blacksmith's apprentice, or, living in a forest amongst little elf kids. But this time, he's downright poor. No one else in Ordon Village has tears in their clothing like him. It's not something that's like a particular facet of the Ordon region or anything. And to jump ahead a bit, you start the game with 0 rupees, which admittedly is not super unusual for Zelda, because, you have to earn the currency to use the currency to buy the items. But unlike other games, saving up anything for an item will actually cause the Ordon shopkeeper Sarah to act particularly surprised at you. It's unusual for Link to have enough money to buy anything. And this is an interesting, understated, and frankly under-discussed aspect to Link's characterization of the game, and it's one that we can only notice because of the slow pace of this intro sequence that allows it to be shown off and put on display. Going ahead to the second day of the game, Link will immediately be awoken by 4 village children who look up to him as the oldest kid in Ordon. Talking to them will inform the player of their objective for the day. Save up enough money to buy a slingshot, show off your skills to the kids. 2 simple tasks, right? Wrong. It's actually much easier said than done. See, the thing is, the shopkeeper in Ordon Village is too sad about her cat running away to sell Link any items, but her cat is too busy catching fish to return home. And that means Link needs a fishing rod, but he doesn't have one, and if he wants to get a fishing rod so he can catch any fish to give to the cat, he needs to go to the only woman in town who can give him a fishing rod. However, she's a bit too busy looking for her baby cradle, which floated down the river. And if that's not bad enough, while the player can see the baby cradle, it's in the hands of a monkey who's sitting atop a ledge that the player can't reach. Did you get all that? Did you take notes? 'Cause you're gonna need to remember it. Usually the game makes you go a little ways in before you get the Straw Millionaire type quest, but this game puts it right in the intro. While this may seem like a ridiculous amount of steps for what amounts to buying one singular item, it's also actually a really valuable moment. It gives the player not only a direct tutorial in mechanics like climbing vines, targeting important objects, or using whistlegrass to call down a hawk, it also gives you a subtle hidden tutorial about how puzzles will work throughout the entirety of Twilight Princess. Dungeons in The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess are very rarely straightforward. Seldom will you find one where you simply, go into the entrance, go through the rooms in their specific order, fight the boss, and you're done. More often than not, you're actually shown what your end goal is for the dungeon immediately, but you have to figure out how to achieve it as you progress through the dungeon. In the Forest Temple, for example, the player will repeatedly be moving along 3 paths as they collect monkeys in order to swing to the boss room, which is just out of reach without them. For the impatient Link that tries to make the jump on his own, or with less than the 3 monkeys, you'll just fall flat on your face and need to climb up a ladder to try again. And in the Temple of Time, you will immediately see the boss room, but you'll need to ignore it until you can get the dungeon's main item. Twilight Princess is a game all about knowing what your end goal is and slowly putting together the process to reach it as if you're putting together the pieces of an actual puzzle. The only tangible difference between this moment and, for example, the later Snow Peak Ruins dungeon where you must repeatedly bring different foodstuffs to a Yeti in order for him to make soup for his definitely not possessed wife, is scale and the existence, or in this case, non-existence of enemies. This slingshot purchasing sequence is indirectly teaching the player all about what kind of design philosophy they can expect to see in this game's dungeons later, and all while still keeping the peaceful daily life tone that this section is trying to establish. The individual steps for getting the slingshot also teach the player one last vital element of Twilight Princess. This game is more than happy to laugh at you. By this point in the intro, Any player who has played a previous game in the series is probably getting foot-tappingly impatient and really wants to just progress through this as fast as possible to get onto the main game. Twilight Princess realizes this, but it doesn't care. Once you successfully retrieve Uli's baby cradle from the monkey, she doesn't just give you the fishing rod. That would be far too quick and simple for what we're trying to do here. Instead, you have to slowly walk with her halfway across town until she reaches her home while carrying the cradle. After all, I mean, couldn't the monkey just steal it again, or couldn't she drop it again? You can't risk something like that happening, right? So you gotta be there for it. And being there for it takes 2 entire minutes, which, admittedly, is not a lot of time on paper. But it's sure gonna feel like an eternity as you sit there in the moment, merely watching her character model slowly walking through Ordon Village until you can finally get the fishing rod. But don't be mistaken, just because you have the fishing rod doesn't mean you're out of the woods yet. Because with the fishing rod obtained, the player will now get to play through Twilight Princess's fishing minigame, and it should go without saying that, much like in real life, fishing is no fast-paced task. And even honestly more than that, fishing for the first time in Twilight Princess will probably take a lot longer than you expect, because the player must learn how it works with minimal UI and almost no explanation. It's probably the most hard to grasp fishing mechanic in the entire Legend of Zelda series, and, ironically, one of the least optional, since it actually does come up again later in the game as well. And then, if that weren't enough, as if to mock you for wanting the game to go even faster, catching a single fish simply won't be enough to satisfy that greedy cat. The hungry cat won't even notice the first one you hook. You're gonna need to provide a veritable seafood feast and hook a second fish in order to progress. It's pretty hard to interpret this in any way other than the developers having a laugh at the player's expense. And you know what? If I'm being completely honest with you guys, I can't help but greatly respect that. Once all this is finally finished and the player can finally get their hands on that slingshot, they return home to be greeted with a nice surprise. Link's mentor, Russell, has a wooden sword to give him. And getting to this point can take some players up to 2 hours, by far the longest period of time it takes to retrieve and be taught how to use a sword in any Legend of Zelda game. Bar none. Thankfully, unlike the opponent tutorial, the player won't have to wait very long to actually use this item. Moments after you retrieve the wooden sword, the village kids will chase a monkey into the monster-filled Faron Woods. Not exactly the safest place to play, and being that the only person with a sword around is you, it's up to Link to save them. After a good long while of farming, fetching, and saving up money, this sequence is the first of what you would expect from a typical The Legend of Zelda game, as the player charges into the woods and fights pig-like monsters along the path until they reach the now endangered children and rescue them! It's a fun, intense sequence, but even now, something about it feels different from a typical Zelda adventure. At no point during this action section is the player given the impression that Link's daily life is in any way going to change. This is at most a little bump in the road until things go right back to farm boy normalcy. And in fact, things do go back to normal afterward. Once the kids are saved, you all go home happy. Everyone's got smiles on their faces, they're making plans to hang out with Link tomorrow. Of course, Link is going on his journey tomorrow, but that's just a simple delivery, and there's no reason to think his life will change. I mean, maybe this is just a farming and mailman sim. That'd be kind of unique for a Zelda game. I think it's worth a shot trying. But that's not the kind of game that this one is, of course. Even so, the opening days of Twilight Princess have spent time slowly, methodically building a peaceful and happy atmosphere. One where, even if you know what kind of game it is, it feels like nothing can go wrong. At the same time, though, the game hasn't been completely wasting the player's time, as they have been, as we've established, both directly and indirectly taught most of what they'll need to know going forward in the rest of the game, both mechanics-wise and design philosophy-wise. But you may be getting this far into the video and wonder, why does this matter? Why bother spending so much time at the beginning of the game establishing this peaceful atmosphere? Even if the inevitable moment where the peace shatters is coming soon, and you've known it's been coming probably the entire time because you know what kind of game it is, couldn't it have just been done in a quicker fashion? I mean, no other Legend of Zelda game before this one has spent nearly as long on its intro as Twilight Princess. But the thing is, this is very much an intentional and purposeful design decision. During development, the focus for Twilight Princess was to make the largest Zelda game ever, a title that Iwata personally requested be 120% Zelda, which is honestly a lot of Zelda. And due to this, in many ways, Twilight Princess was a game that went back to the basics of what people expected from a 3D Zelda game, after the experimental timeline of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, and the more exploratory format of The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker. The similarities which Twilight Princess has to The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time are far from subtle. Not only do many dungeons, puzzles, and plot points of this title directly mirror those of Ocarina of Time, but it even uses the same music at many points for a direct homage. Some have even, frankly, falsely in my opinion, accused Twilight Princess of being a direct copy of the Nintendo 64 classic. Something that I think really gets overlooked when listing the many ways that Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess are similar, however, is how the game takes the well-known Zelda game design formula and uses it to do new things and subvert those concepts. Key among these is how Twilight Princess changes the Dark World concept, which was seen in many prior Zelda games. Many games in the Legend of Zelda franchise feature two worlds to explore. It's basically a series trope. This concept didn't begin with the original game, however. It began with A Link to the Past, where, midway through the game, the player would be transported to a dark mirror of Hyrule that was filled to the brim with Ganon's forces. And in the years that have followed, the concept of exploring two different worlds has been prevalent in a lot of Zelda games. In Ocarina of Time, for example, the player is sent to a dark future timeline. And in the Minish Cap, you shrink down to explore Hyrule from quite literally a different perspective. And for Twilight Princess, this dark world comes in the form of the titular Twilight. Unlike other explorations of this concept, where the change occurs midway through the game, Twilight Princess actually begins with Hyrule covered in this dusk, and all of its citizens turned into timeless spirits as monsters roam free across the land. While flat out starting this game in the equivalent of the Dark World would have been an actually pretty novel concept, it's not hard to see how it also would have been kind of difficult to pull off. The reason why the Dark World in A Link to the Past and the future timeline of Ocarina of Time, for example, work is because they subvert the player's expectations. They take areas that you've already explored and they twist them to throw the player off guard with how they're ruined or crawling with monsters or just not what you're used to. How can that same feeling of the world being twisted be invoked if the player actually has yet to even experience the world? You can't twist something that you don't know. It just wouldn't work. And that, right there, is why Twilight Princess's opening hours are so important. In order to create the largest contrast possible between the normal world and the oppressive Twilight, the player is made to slowly live out multiple days in the peaceful farm life of Link, just on the outskirts of Hyrule, before that peaceful life is taken away from them in the blink of an eye, and they are quite literally dragged into the Twilight for their adventure. On the third day of the player's life in Ordon Village, the player will begin much like they did the first day. You're back to herding goats on the ranch. It's time to go back to farm boy chores, and then you head home. It's time for Link to finally leave Ordon Village and deliver that message to Hyrule, which will surely go as planned. All you gotta do is hop on Epona and go into the sunset. But fate has different plans for you. Much like everything else in Twilight Princess up to this point, it won't be that simple. Before Link can leave on his important quest, monsters unlike those even seen in Faron Woods charge through the gates riding on bulls. Not only is one of the kids who Link is friends with kidnapped, another is shot with an arrow. And before Link can even come close to saving them, shadow-like hands grab him and drag him into the twilight. And from there, Link loses his human form and transforms into a wolf. His peaceful life has officially and brutally come to an end. It is important to note that this isn't the most unique approach to game design in the world. There are plenty of JRPGs who have similar intros. For example, the Dragon Quest franchise is a big fan of this style of opening. But setting that aside, within the arena of Nintendo-developed games, intros like this are virtually non-existent. To this day, Twilight Princess still has an absurdly unique introduction when compared to the other games in the franchise, with only Skyward Sword's long tutorial being even remotely comparable. It's undeniable that Twilight Princess's opening hours have faced more than their fair share of criticism over the years for how slow they are and how the player doesn't even get the opportunity to go to a dungeon for nearly 4 hours of gameplay. But I personally really enjoy the slow pace of this intro and how it makes the world feel so much more alive and lived in by having you actually live in it. It teaches the player the basics of the game in a seamless and unobtrusive way that feels like just part of your character's life. And it helps the story moment of being pulled into the Twilight Realm have an incredible impact on the player that I truly earnestly believe it would not if this tutorial was any shorter or any faster. And that's my honest thoughts and feelings on the Twilight Princess introduction and why I think it is so well done and necessary for the game. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to check out the article that inspired it, which I will link in the description, and you can find it on RaiderKing.com along with all of my other writings. So if you're there and you want to check out my other writing, go right ahead. I'd really appreciate it because I do put a lot of passion into this work and I really enjoy it, and I hope you do too. So thank you so much for watching this video, and we hope to see you again in the Kokiri Kingdom. Thanks for watching! Bye!